Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where I am meeting you. My name is Maria Skóra, and I am a policy fellow at das Progressive Zentrum in Berlin, but currently a DAAD research fellow at the American-German Institute here in Washington, D.C. And I will be your host today. It's my great pleasure. And we're meeting today because on November 5th, the United States have voted. The United States had not only voted for the president, but also for Congress, and often also in regional and local elections. But the biggest news is that Donald Trump will be the 47th president of the United States, making history by coming back to the White House after leaving it. And after having a break, it seems that Republicans will also have a majority in the Senate with 52 seats, so plus 3 seats, and perhaps we'll also win the House. But last time I checked, the votes were still being counted. But the possible scenario is that the winner will take it all. So the result was perhaps predictable, but this red wave shocked and baffled many about the scale of the Republican victory. And today we want to ask key questions referring to this change in the United States. So what does it mean for the country? What does it mean for the US-German relations? And what does it mean for the transatlantic bond in general? So welcome to this after work US election debrief. I hope you're seated comfortably. You've grabbed yourself a drink, a snack, and we will be talking about America, but also the elephant in the room. We also will be looking into inter-German affairs as the progressive traffic light coalition collapsed, and Germany is possibly facing elections in spring 2025 or even earlier. So things are happening this week, and this event is brought to you by das Progressive Zentrum, the Progressive Policy Institute, and the SPD Berlin. It is a public event and will be recorded and published at DPZ's websites and its social media channels. But I can only invite you, dear viewers, to ask questions to our speakers. You could use the question and Q&A function of the Zoom. And our wonderful guests today, our distinguished guests today are Metin Hakverdi, member of the German Bundestag, Social Democratic Party, SPD in Germany, and a well-known transatlanticist. It's Leslie Harrod, member of the Colorado House of Representatives, Democratic Party, and Scott Holcomb, member of the Georgia House of Representatives, also Democratic Party. And since you, Scott, told us you cannot stay with us to the end of this conversation, let's talk with you first. So a warm-up question. How are you feeling after November 5th?
Um, I'm in a good mood today, and that is a choice. I was certainly very disappointed by the outcome on Tuesday, but I also wasn't very surprised. So I think if you followed some of it very, very closely, it was an outcome that certainly had fairly high probability. It was a coin flip.
Okay, and so you're based in Georgia, and Georgia was a particularly watched battleground state during this election, not only because it's a big state with 16 electoral college votes, but also because it's recently been a swing state. In 2016, Donald Trump won in Georgia, but in 2026, this was a victory of Joe Biden, a slight margin, but still. This time, however, Georgia turned red again. But again, Trump won with a very little margin, 50.7%. And Georgia will also be sending 14 representatives to the House, right? 9 Republicans and 5 Democrats. So could you briefly explain the political landscape in Georgia? What has changed from 2020 that this pivot towards Democrats didn't last? What affected voters that this swing state swung in favor of Republicans?
That's a great question. And to give just a little bit of context is up until 2020, is Georgia had been very reliably conservative and Republican in terms of statewide elections. No Democrat had won statewide in approximately 20 years. And the 2016 race was fairly close, even though Trump won. But then in 2020, there were a number of factors. One was extraordinarily good organizing, and then the other was there was continued discontent with the direction of the country, and the economy also had challenges. And with that, a fair number of individuals who would probably ordinarily vote Republican voted Democratic. And it was an extremely narrow margin, as everybody will recall, about 11,000 votes in a population that's over 11 million and with approximately 5 million voters. And then this time around, it wasn't as close. And there were, I think, a few factors for it. One is it is extremely difficult to win an election when the majority of people in the country think that you're going in the wrong direction, and that they also feel, notwithstanding that the general economy was strong in the United States, but there was a sense and a feeling that that was not the case. The other things at a micro level that I'll share that I don't know existed in other places around the country were that the messaging of the Trump campaign was impactful. He primarily focused on immigration, which is a national issue, and he also focused very strongly on transgender rights and very much criticized Vice President Harris for her position on that. She had, in particular, a commercial with two Black men who were very critical of transgender rights. And unfortunately, I think that was one impactful part. And so where I take some solace is that if you look at his performance, it was still below that of Brian Kemp just 2 years ago. So there still is some part of the population that hasn't bought into it. But overall, it was a step back from the positive growth that we had had towards moving Georgia into the blue column.
And would you still explain the campaign to our viewers? Like, how do you assess this campaign, the overall mood, style, intensity? It was a very fierce competition in the presidential race, wasn't it?
I think it was. I know that there are some that are critical of the campaign. I'm not. I think Vice President Harris and Tim Walz worked extraordinarily hard. They campaigned their hearts out. They came to Georgia constantly, and they put everything they had into the race. And what I saw on the ground too is there was no lack of effort. So it's not as if we didn't work as hard as we possibly could. It's just, unfortunately, more voters went in their direction than with us. So there are some folks who are really, really critical. I'm not. I think that the campaign worked really hard, and it's just sometimes it doesn't go your way.
So, but still, if you were to name like one really strong side of this campaign and a real weakness that you think could be improved by the Democratic Party, what would that be?
I'm still working through that, to be honest. It's only
Okay.
been a few days since the election, but one thing that I would maybe consider would be that on the economic issues, and I think ultimately that was a primary factor for most voters, is that the Democratic Party should have been much, much stronger in talking about them. And I'll throw out just two things. Is one, Republicans really did an effective job of blaming the president and then the vice president for inflation without taking a step back and saying this was a global issue. And relative to the globe, as inflation in the United States was either on par or lower than most other places, and our economy had moved forward. The other thing that I don't know that the administration, which of course ties to Vice President Harris's campaign, did enough to really talk about the great work that they did on the economy overall and the investments. Like Leslie and I were just in Europe a few weeks ago, and we kept hearing about the Inflation Reduction Act. It really wasn't talked about very much in the United States, but it drove massive investments in manufacturing and job growth. But I don't know that there was enough attention and focus on that and explaining to the voters all the things that had been done to really help the country turn the corner on some of those economic issues. So if I were to try to identify a couple that maybe we could have done better on, those would be some of them.
Okay, thank you. And back to Georgia and its very specific role it played in the last elections, well, maybe not Georgia, but Donald Trump in Georgia. In 2022, he spread conspiracy theories about lost votes and was also pushing the Secretary of State in Georgia to find him the votes to avoid electoral defeat. Well, Donald Trump is known or has been known and has repeated claims of election fraud also in this campaign, even on the election day. But because of that past experience in Georgia in 2020, were voters more sensitive? What impact such claims had for the voter turnout, mobilization, and most importantly, trust in the elections, in the system, electoral system, in democracy in Georgia? Do you see any negative or consequences?
I have not heard or seen very much this week. I think most people have accepted the results. I also, I imagine it was an extraordinarily difficult thing to do, Vice President Harris showed tremendous character and courage by doing the right thing, which was to concede the race and even to call somebody who she probably personally finds to be a despicable human being. That likely wasn't an easy call to do, but she set a precedent which we should all honor. And it's a point of massive frustration that that's not the case. But in terms of the trust in the system, that certainly played a major, major role in the election of our 2 U.S. senators from Georgia, which I'm very, very grateful for, that distrust that they promoted. But we have had a number of measures on voting over the last few years, many of them candidly to make it a little bit more difficult and challenging, but people were motivated. And that gets to where I started is I don't have a lot of criticism because people showed up, notwithstanding all the changes and the attempts at changing rules, and the court rightly intervened in some of the extreme measures that our state election board tried to impose. So I would probably leave off with it remains to be determined where we go from here in terms of trust in the system. And it can't be that just when your side wins, the system works.
Yes. Well, that's the growing distrust in governments in the system is unfortunately a malaise on both sides of the Atlantic. But let's hope that the next term of Donald Trump in the office won't aggravate the situation here. And just two last questions to you, Scott, before you leave our event. Well, it's the day after. The dust is slowly settling down. Do you think that Americans can turn the page now, how just as Kamala Harris was promising or asking the Americans for in her campaign? Will this partisan polarization, this gap between the red and blue America persist? Is it at all possible after this campaign, which was a very emotional one, and also quite strong words were falling in this campaign? This must be leaving an impact on society. And I think Georgia is a state, as we've just spoken, which is split almost in half, right? So how
Yes.
do you see this American reconciliation happening, if at all, after the election?
I don't. I think it's going to be a very challenging path forward. And one of many concerns that I have about this Trump administration is he lacks in any way any type of leadership where he cares about anybody other than those who kiss his ring. Is all he wants are sycophants and nothing more. And so that we're probably likely to see him set a very partisan, nasty tone. He doesn't have the capacity to be a leader who wants to try to bring the country together, notwithstanding him saying that in the campaign, but he doesn't mean it. I think we'll just see him in particular really push the country apart. So I think where we are now is likely going to be the norm. And one of the takeaways of the election, I would say, is this. For many of us, and certainly myself, is I always thought that Trump was just an aberration and really a fluke. And I think the takeaway of Tuesday is that it's not. And so it's something that we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have to fight. We're going to have to redouble our efforts. And while we might be extraordinarily disappointed, sad, frustrated, we really can't give up. And I say that not in a trite way, but if we give up, we lose. And so now is really the time to find your strength, find your motivation, and just really stay committed to the values that we share. Because in the end, I have no doubt that that's ultimately where our country and our world will go, towards the progressive values which we believe in. But it ain't going to be easy. I think I'll leave it with that. I'm girding myself personally for a very, very challenging inter-party fight as soon as we reconvene.
So, how I'm reading what you've just said is that your expectations to the new Republican leadership are rather negative.
Yes, very much so. And some of the um, some of the concerns too are there were a few individuals within the first Trump administration who effectively acted as a brake on some of his worst motivations and desires. I don't think the administration is going to have any people like that this time around, or very, very few. And so you're just not going to see much, if any, restraint in terms of what he wants to do, instead of, yes, dear leader, whatever you want. And it's I don't know all the answers. All I know is that we have to be ready for an extreme fight and struggle over the next 4 years, because that's what we're going to have.
Well, this coming administration has already been labeled by some journalists as a revenge administration, right? And we know that when autocrats or populists are back in power after a break, they tend, at least try not to make the same mistakes, to lose the power grab, and sometimes they're even more radical than they were when given a chance for the first time. Scott Holcomb, thank you so much for joining us today from Georgia. I wish you strength, and still, I hope we can be of any help or support here in Germany. We hope to connect with you maybe in the better times. But thank you very much for being with us today. And I would like to move now
So
to
much.
Leslie. Thank you. And I would like to move to Leslie Herod, who is a member of the Colorado House of Representatives. And we are starting on a bit negative note after the reflections that Scott shared with us. But Leslie, a warm-up question to you. How are you feeling after November 5th?
Well, I got to tell you, it is a pretty devastating blow to not only progressives, Americans, but also to us as Black women in this country. Seeing a campaign that, as Scott illustrated, was quite frankly as flawless as it could have been for a presidential campaign. To still see people not standing behind Kamala as a Black woman being our Black and Asian woman being our next president, and instead going for someone who has committed to rolling back the rights of Americans. I think that's something that we should all be very worried about. Now, what I will say though, in the positive, is having someone like Scott, a white man, moderate, I would say, in Georgia, being a part of this fight is really important, because the Democratic Party, while it's been a big tent and it's been incredibly diverse, we know we have not strengthened our base when it comes to actually talking with working class white people. We know we're losing Latinos and Black folks in droves, and we know that, Black women have committed to not necessarily leading in the next 4 years in protecting the freedoms that we have in the past. And so there's a lot of work that we need to do. I am feeling not optimistic for the country right now, but I do know that there's leaders in place that are really focusing on making sure that our rights are not rolled back in this time.
Okay, Leslie. I would like to maybe focus on what you said about the demographics, mobilizing voters, but relating it to your state, your home state of Colorado, which was traditionally Republican for most of the 20th century, but turned purple from red to purple since 2008, when Barack Obama won in the state, and ever since the vote has been a Democratic vote. Kamala Harris won in Colorado with 54%. So also perhaps not a landslide, but still a significant support for the Democratic candidate. So Colorado is also an important state because of the growing population, 10 electoral votes. And Democrats, unlike in what we've just said, we've just been talking about Georgia, also maintain supermajority in the state house, you also have majority in the Senate. So two different states. Would you explain how this demographic worked in the past in the state of Colorado to turn from red to blue? And why is it as stable as we consider a change, unlike in Georgia?
Yeah. Well, I got to say, I am proud to be a Coloradan. So thank you so much for that. In Colorado, not only did we keep the supermajority in the House, we are one vote short of a supermajority in the Senate, which we've never seen before. We have kept the strength of the Black caucus, the Latino caucus as progressives as well, and have grown our LGBTQ caucus. And so that's important to note. But additionally, we had two ballot measures on the ballot that I think are really important. One was the freedom for reproductive health for people across the state of Colorado, specifically guaranteeing a right to an abortion in any instance as necessary and deemed medically necessary and appropriate by a person and their caretaker and their doctor. And so we have enshrined that into our state constitution. That was on the ballot and it won with a huge vote. Additionally, we have enshrined the right to marriage for LGBTQ folks. I'm the first Black LGBTQ member of the General Assembly and out elected official in the state of Colorado as a Black person. And that was extremely important to me that we made sure to protect the right to marriage should this administration, which now is the next administration, take power. And so what I would say is that it's not necessarily the demographic shift that has changed Colorado. I'm showing my age now, but we started this movement about 20 years ago, where I was a part of a young group of kids, really, in college, who started an organization called New Era Colorado to get the young vote out and up across the state. And the interesting thing about that was it wasn't just about getting young folks out. We were tied into the larger progressive movement. Dog. One second. We're on a snow day here, so he is feeling very anxious. But it wasn't just about that. It was about the investment in the state. To turn Colorado from red to purple to blue took billions, millions of dollars, if not billions. And we had that investment. This last election cycle, even though we were not a key state or one of those battleground states any longer, which we were in 2012 when I was on the Obama campaign, we still had the money invested in politics because of our congressional races, which was Yadira Caraveo, Lauren Boebert, and others, and those ballot measures. So we had a substantial increase in money in politics, and we've continued to kind of hold those numbers. And whenever we see a dip, it's not compared to the other states. And so there has been a concerted effort to ensuring that the people of Colorado understand the work that has been done by Democrats, and we have made real change. That's key. So when we look at things like migration, immigration, there's a huge rhetoric and a huge pull of folks saying, and Trump came to Colorado to say that migrants were taking over our state. They were violent, they were gang rapists and all of that. And of course, Colorado says that's not the case. We know who our neighbors are. We know that the migrants who are coming here are just seeking a better life. And we also know that if that's not the case, law enforcement is in place to take care of that. And so the anti-migrant sentiment didn't pull the vote as much as folks would have believed it would have. And so now that we're facing mass deportations, Trump has promised they will start in our state. We have a lot of work to do to make sure that folks are safe.
So what you're basically saying is that this change has been very much worked on. It's in a collective effort over the last 2 decades. And as you said, do you think this blue change can spread to other or across other traditionally Republican states, or the other way around? Are you worried that the Republicans could take the traditionally Democrat states, exactly, for example, exactly launching such initiatives, appealing to young people, trying to take over certain agendas which would be traditionally associated with the Democratic Party?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that we should all be worried about that. Folks are watching Colorado very closely because we did have those really tough seats. We had, Lauren Boebert switching over to moving literally to run in a different district as a super, conservative. And then we had uh, Yadira Caraveo, who kind of pushed back against the Democratic Party to run a more moderate race. And as someone who served with her, she is that person. She put out exactly who she was and is. And she won that traditionally moderate seat. Now, she won it with more votes than she did last time, but only by a little bit. I mean, she only won by last time like 500 votes, and now it might be like a few more than that. The numbers are still shaking out. So what I will say is we should all be very concerned that if we are not in touch with the people that we are serving, and we are not getting that message out, that we will lose majorities. We will continue to lose progressive ideals and values. And unfortunately, I think our entire party will shift more to the right, where they're maybe more argument that we are indistinguishable from each other. So I think right now is really a time for Democrats to show who we are, for progressives to show who we are. Scott warned about the infighting. It has already been going on this past 4 years, if not more. It is only getting worse, and that has divided our parties in ways that it's going to take a long time to come back from. So my advice to folks as we're thinking about what's next is to really focus on a long-term strategy. What are we going to do, yes, in the short term to protect Americans from these attacks that we know will come from the Trump administration, but then also what's our long-term strategy? They've been fighting against abortion rights for how many years? And it's worked in some states now. What is our long-term strategy to really win back these voters and make a real difference in people's everyday lives? That's the only way we're going to take back the White House and take back the Senate.
So that's a very laborious process ahead of you, and staying
Yes.
vigilant for the next coming 4 years. And speaking of which,
Longer
yeah,
than 4 years, to be clear. Longer than
I,
4 years.
baby steps, one day at a time, one president
Yeah.
at the time. So, what do you think will change in America, in the United States, in the coming 4 years under the Trump administration, and perhaps a Republican Senate, Republican House? So basically, not that many checks and balances on him, right?
Yeah, and the courts, of course, as well.
Yes.
I believe that Colorado will be a battleground for these court battles, for let me be clear, we have protections for trans people enshrined in our laws. We have non-discrimination protections for all people, people of color, people for gender discrimination, all of that enshrined in our Constitution and in our state statutes. And we have prosecuted people under that. We have qualified immunity to ensure that law enforcement doesn't have broad immunity to do whatever they want to our citizens. That's a bill that I passed during the 2020 uprising. And so we have these protections in place here in Colorado. We have health care for trans folks. We have migrant protection saying there's no coordination with ICE, especially for those who are victims of crime. You can't, go to the courts as a victim of domestic violence and then be deported. That is just not right. So we have these protections, and Colorado will be the place that the courts will determine whether or not they are constitutional and whether or not they will be upheld. Since the courts are so conservative, I have my concerns, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I do think that Trump will abide by Project 2025. I believe that there is a blueprint and a playbook, and as close as he can get to that playbook and declare victory on every single plank of that platform, he will. And so right now, my phone has been inundated with people who are worried about their families, about their friends, their neighbors, and what are we going to do to protect folks? And states are coming together at a subnational level to have that conversation. What are we going to do to protect people in our states? What are we going to do to protect people globally? And how are we going to put out a counter narrative about who we are as Americans?
Okay, so going to the state level versus federal level, what effect, like what very concrete policies or effect do you think this White House and potentially the Congress can have on the state of Colorado? If you could explain our viewers, what are the policies, potential decisions of the incoming leadership that could help you with your problems, not probable, or aggravate the problems you're facing in Colorado?
I think the tension that will be created with federal laws and policies that do not align with Colorado law and policies and values is going to be a huge issue. Whether it's, unions and what they have fought for so long, reproductive health care, trans and LGBTQ rights, we are going to see that tension really exacerbated, right? But additionally, with what we're seeing with the Trump administration and Trump's promises, right, is we're going to see an influx of folks to our states. Colorado is a safe haven. We even have a gay governor, is a safe haven for many people. And that's going to put a huge strain on our resources and our system and our ability to provide basic services to those who live here. So we're going to have to partner with states that are sanctuary states, for lack of better word yet, for our citizens. Like, what are we going to do to ensure that people who are bleeding out on an emergency room table get the healthcare that they need? They're coming to Colorado. Doctors are coming to Colorado. Patients are coming to Colorado. Migrants are coming to Colorado. I mean, this is going to be a huge strain again on our state, and we have to figure out what to do. And we can't just put that burden on the citizens. We know that if we increase taxes or if we increase people's, household outputs, right, groceries and things like that, there will be backlash. And so we have to really balance all of that. What I will say, another thing that Colorado has done, and perhaps this has protected us from a backlash, is we do have a thing called the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. I'm not going to get too wonky and go into that, but feel free to Google. But what I will say is what that does do is that means that every Coloradan every year gets a check from the state of Colorado, and it refunds a portion of their taxes back to them. That check is signed by our governor, and of course, the legislature debates that every year. Now, we know a lot of people talked about Trump's issuing those stimulus checks. We know that people were very interested in that and said that was the only time they had seen that. We do that in Colorado every year. Coloradans have more faith in our government than other states obviously do in theirs, and we've got to do something. We've got to do more to make people believe in our elected leaders again, believe in, what it even means to serve and be a community servant. And I know that the narrative from the Trump administration will be opposite of that, but people are going to be looking at us to see what we're saying and what we're going to do to fight for each other.
Well, and of course, like from the state level, probably building coalitions among states, like-minded states, is very important. So my last question is, are you of course, you are in exchange with your colleagues and members of the Democratic Party in other states in the US, but how are you, if you can share that with us, how are you preparing together to build a solid coalition, to seek allies, to potentially oppose whatever will be coming from the federal level? Are you already preparing for this from the regional level to face the federal level?
Yes, absolutely. So we are in conversations now. There were some conversations that happened before the election. I don't think enough, but some were definitely started there. And in fact, Scott and I, as mentioned, we're out in Europe having some of these conversations. And then the governors, the Democratic governors, are coming together to really think about what needs to happen at their level. Executive orders, special sessions. Some states will be going into special sessions in the coming weeks to put protections into place that need to happen before the transition of power takes place. I will say that we have guaranteed a peaceful transition of power. We have, election denying is now evaporated for some reason. I guess people believe the election when it goes in the way that they want it to go. So we don't see election deniers. We have seen some election fraud, but that has been identified, and people have been not fully prosecuted, but people have been arrested. We know that has happened. And so our system is safe and secure. And so right now, we honor the vote of the American people, and we know that there is so much more that we need to do. It starts with a reckoning of who we are as a party, why we've lost voters, and we're going to have to do a lot more than just nasal gaze to get there.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie, so much. And now I'd like to turn to Metin. Thank you very much for being with us and patience. But now we have a very comprehensive overview of what has happened in the United States, what are we facing? And you have been a great promoter of Transatlantic Alliance, a great friend of the United States. And the US has indeed been an important ally for Europe, for Germany, especially in the turbulent times that we're seeing. The Biden administration brought a significant quality change to those multilateral but also bilateral relations. So this new change coming will inevitably have impact on it. And there is perhaps also change coming in Germany. There is definitely a new European Commission. So some advisors say that we should not only get ready for an era of uncertainty, but also a new acceleration of this new Cold War 2.0. So, Metin, based on your experience as a politician, as a transatlantist, warm-up question that I started conversations with everybody. How are you feeling after November 5th and considering the German context after November 6th?
Well, difficult question. I didn't sleep that much this week, so I just returned from Berlin. I'm in Hamburg now. So the foremost feeling is I just need 2 or 3 days of a little rest. So I don't feel stressed anymore. I'm not panicking. I'm just a little tired, basically. But that will change in the next 1 or 2 days.
Well, thank you for being with us despite this very busy schedule. But what do you make of this election result in the United States? Were you expecting this? I think we, in this progressive circles, were hoping for a different outcome, but well, it's reality now.
No, I was hoping for a Harris victory, but it was not super surprising that it could go for Trump, but it is. But I am surprised about the numbers and the distance. I'm obviously not surprised about the outcome of the Senate races, but going all the way through Congress, I didn't expect it that much. In this alternative of a Republican win, I didn't expect that the margins would be that high. I was really surprised, not only overall, state by state, particularly in swing states, but then also between several focus groups where we're talking about for years, actually. So if you are going to ask me the same question as Scott, what the reason was, it is super difficult. And one has to find an answer to that. And it's probably going to be not only just one answer, but several answers. It is super complicated if you look at the focus groups.
I actually have a different set of questions for you. And I would like to ask...
But let me say this amongst progressives, because I think you have to face the truth, even if you don't like it.
Yeah.
So in a two-party system, those numbers are a sum of voters that are not necessarily all the same. You have traditional Republican voters, you have traditional anti-democratic voters, because your family always voted Democratic or Republican, whatever. You have one-issue voters concerning taxes, whatever, concerning abortion rights. But you have obviously also a group of people that are just willing to blow up the system. So they are not all the voters of the Republican Party, but they are willing to vote and engage in and make the difference, actually. And my interpretation is that there is at least some voters on our side. Our side in a two-party system is a pretty large, super big tent.
Broad church, yeah.
They are not willing to vote for a woman. I have no idea how big that number is, but they are around. So we have to address this. The alternative cannot be not to put a woman in the candidacy place again, and the result can also not be to just ignore this. And it's not only men, by the way. It's also women that don't vote for women. But we have to address this. We cannot just give them up and leave them with this pure sexism.
To support your words, Joe Biden got 81 million votes, 81 million to be precise in 2020, and Kamala Harris compared 69.1. So there is a big difference. That's definitely a challenge to the Democratic Party, and I think many progressive parties also in Europe. But I'd like to ask you about the outcome of these elections for the US-German relationship. How will it affect, including also your work as a parliamentarian, as a person deeply involved in the political dialogue between the US and Germany? What you see coming?
Well, it's not an advantage that Donald Trump is going to be president. That's for sure. So if I look at the first term in 2016, 2020, I expect that the reputation of the United States as a whole, not to talk about the president himself, but the reputation of the United States itself will drop to nothing. So remember that polling we had in 17 to 18 in the first term of the trust relation Germans had to the United States. It was awful. They put Xi Jinping on number 1, Vladimir Putin on 2. This is after Crimea, right? And then Donald Trump on 3rd. So it will drop to nothing. And once it's down there, once the public opinion is down there, then tying any relationship, keeping up any tie will be super difficult for politicians if it's part of the public. And you cannot just keep it out of the public and make it all private. That doesn't work either. So you have to explain more why it's still useful to be in contact with the United States generally, with our friends on the Democratic side, but also with representatives of the Republican Party and even the president himself. That will be difficult. That will be very difficult.
And Donald Trump in his campaign also made some bold claims about foreign policy, right? Especially regarding the war in Ukraine, but also the conflict in the Middle East, which happens to be the direct, immediate neighborhood of the European Union. Overall security architecture, therefore, will be strained, will be put to a test. He was also talking about the trade wars. So what should Europe, beyond Germany, what should Europe get ready for? What would be your advice to Ursula von der Leyen, who just, I think, announced that Europe should buy more liquid gas from the United States to avoid trade wars? But what would be your?
I just want to add one thing on your list concerning neighborhood. It's the Western Balkans. Also, the list is super long, but if you see what the process on the Western Balkans were during the Trump administration, that was also critical. So you don't have to go to the Middle East. It's even closer than that. It's everywhere. And it's even within the European Union if you look at Hungary and other states. So I would suggest that concerning Ursula von der Leyen and the European Union, I think we are much better prepared than we were last time. Much, much more better, a lot better. We have some sort of, I would say, toolbox, if not arsenal of elements how to react. That goes from strict protectionism concerning entering our market generally. I'm talking about the Commission now only. We have elements of reacting on tariffs on a scale that would be flexible enough to really hurt the American economy as well. But we also have in this arsenal also, I would say, win-win offers. So you have all the opportunities and all the risks and all the threats as well. So we are prepared in that technically. I think there are two challenges to that. One is, of course, the unity of the European Union, like always. It's very, very easy concern. It is impossible to break out California or Montana from the United States in a trade issue. It is very easy to break out other single member state countries of the European Union on the other side. So we have to find a way how we stick together as you know, constitutional changes within the European Union concerning qualified majorities, for example. We haven't made any progress on that one that we could that we could be more flexible on our actions at this point. But I think the Big Four will have some sort of unity on this issue, knowing that otherwise we would be really severely harmed in our main economies, even if those economy branches are different. So talking about Germany, it's always about cars and chemical industry, but others would have their challenges as well. It will change our relationship, or will speed up our relation bonding with the United Kingdom concerning the economic front. And on the security side, it will be, if it's a healthy reaction of the European Union, will speed up things that we have been talking about for years. Usually under pressure, and this will be a lot of pressure, the European Union reacts in big integrational steps. And I'm still an optimist, so I believe that this will happen as well. The Ukrainian issue obviously is a special issue.
Yeah, of course. But then what I'm taking from your what you've just said is that you're very, of course, realistic and very aware of the challenges coming, but still slightly optimistic in the sense that we've had it before and we more or less should know how to react. We are at least aware of what's coming. Bringing it back to Germany, my last question to you is that we probably will be facing elections sooner than we were all expecting. And you started talking about the campaign, and I would like to hear your thoughts on, despite this defeat, what you think we could learn from the Americans regarding the campaign. What would be your takeaways for mobilizing people?
Come on, you just asked Scott, and he said he needs time to think about it. So what am I supposed to say? We are not living in a two-party system in Germany. We have a multi-party system, which changes a lot of the game. But I think for center left, for progressive parties generally, for progressive ideas, I think this was an election in the United States where we all have to think about what we're always sure about in the last years, whether this would work in a free and democratic system. So if you look at the numbers of people having serious economic fears on one hand, and on the other hand, in the United States, assuming this economic competency on the side of Donald Trump, which I find ridiculous that he's an economic expert in the eyes of these people, but they see him like this. You cannot get around this by just arguing he's a threat to democracy. It'd be cool if it would work, but it didn't work, and it didn't work on two sides. First of all, people didn't believe that he's a threat to democracy, and the issue of democracy was not as important generally. So both factors combined is basically, I would say, not a sufficient campaign. And we do have a different ball game in Germany with elections compared to the United States for several reasons, but still there are some similarities on this front between, well, internationally seen, between democratic societies and right-wing authoritarian, if you want to, fascist systems, much smaller as a conflict internationally, so within the United States, not as polarized, but there are still these issues around. So we should focus also as a progressive party in our campaign, not only, but I would suggest mainly on the economic side, and try more than maybe in the past, sometimes in the past, think of the assumptions of the audience we are talking to, and not too much about our super great ideas. I know this sounds awful, because we all had our reasons why we entered this business of political science, practical politics, But if you look at the election results in East Germany, we are very, very close to lose a democratic supermajority to change our constitution in the next election. It would be a severe damage to our society if this would happen. So we have to get down to the normal people, if I use that picture, and be authentic about that we feel them, not only knowing them, but really have an emotional relationship to them, because they are subjective. They're not as objective. They're not professionals like we.
Yeah, well, elections, who wins elections wins elections, right? So that's what it all boils down to. But you mentioned democracy, which is I would like to bundle a few questions from the audience now. Questions, I guess, more to Leslie about the Agenda Project 2025. You've already mentioned this. And how do you think it is likely that this incoming presidency will affect U.S. democracy? Kamala Harris was very explicit about Donald Trump being the threat to democracy, as Metin said. Not everybody on both sides of the Atlantic actually understands these or follow these arguments. What do you think will happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that Project 2025, there will be a huge attempt, again, to kind of go through every single one of those planks and platforms and make those reality for Americans and America. And so I think we should be really, aware that there is a blue book, there is a blueprint, and use that as whatever steps we're putting in place to counter that, right? So we shouldn't be surprised when some of these things that are in Project 2025 take place. Access to contraceptives being one, getting rid of Department of Education and other things like that, book bans, all of that stuff will take place, be it at the national level or the state level, because there are a lot of folks who are emulating Trump at the local levels and trying to put those things in place as well. When it comes to the threat to democracy, our democracy is under threat. We have not quite seen a time where we have such a tyrant and someone who is so proud of dictators in the White House, but also having so much control of the courts, the Senate, and maybe the House. And so I do believe there is a huge opportunity for him to make good on some of his promises that, even so far as to say that people might not need to vote in 8 years. Maybe he wants to hold the administration for longer than the 4 that he will have. And so we need to be very clear-minded about this and start now, again, getting the American people behind us and saying that, yes, he's our president, but we cannot let a president unravel our democracy. But we should be concerned about that. I also think we have to be concerned about the stability and safety of democracies across the globe. Trump has allied himself with dictators who are not pro-democracy. And we have a huge military to support whatever efforts this administration chooses to add in American engagement in, and that should be a huge concern to the global population. And then when it comes to the economy, the promises of tariffs and things like that, and the economic sanctions against other countries, I believe will happen as well. And so thinking about ways that we can have trade ties at a subnational level are equally as important as the conversations that, of course, are happening across Europe and across countries across the globe. Trump will do everything in his power to make America the strongest economy, no matter who that leaves behind.
Okay. And in that vein, last question to you, Metin, also coming from the audience. As a politician, you, of course, prepare for still maintaining this transatlantic relationship, sailing these high seas. Do you are maintaining connections with the members of also the Republican Party, which are maybe more moderate, which are maybe not so fond of Trump? Are you already preparing and are in exchange with them, thinking how to save the transatlantic connection in the coming years?
Obviously, yes, of course, with them. That's not too challenging. Challenging is to keep up with the Republicans on the MAGA side, because we have to deal with them somehow. And if you think of Ukraine, if you think of the big issues, it will not be enough just to tell them that they are fascists, even if they are fascists. We will have to find a way to narrow down this problem to a size we can deal with it. It's we will have to cooperate with them. That will be super difficult. It will be super difficult just concerning the deals we will have to make, and it be reduced to deals in a Trump world. It will be also very, very difficult to get some kind of support in the German population and the German audience for that, because they will be disgusted by this man. That will be very, very problematic. But we have to do that. It would be totally irresponsible not to do so, particularly concerning a deal concerning Ukraine. We have to step in more than we are doing it now, but we cannot substitute the United States as a whole. So we will have to work out on a deal. In German, the saying is an offer you cannot reject. So we are down to a real estate negotiation table in Manhattan with this guy concerning the future of the security of Europe. So, but we have to do it, and it will not be fun at all, and it will be democratic-wise a very difficult task to get support of the voters for that.
Yeah. Well, to end on a positive note, after every storm, there is a sunshine. So let's keep this transatlantic conversation dialogue going. Metin Hakverdi, Leslie Harrod, and Scott Holcomb, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing your views and insights into the United States and into the transatlantic relations. Das Progressive Zentrum PPI, SVD Berlin, thank you for putting this conversation together. I'm Maria Skóra, and it was a really great pleasure to moderate this conversation today. I wish us all a good Friday and good weekend, because from next week on, we all have to roll up our sleeves and get to work even harder to for the good of the transatlantic moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Bye-bye.
Bye.